You won't believe what happened on this flight. A teen bullied an elderly black man just for his color, but his mother stepped in and shut it down. You have to see how this moment unfolded, full of tension, respect, and a lesson he'll never forget. Hit that like, share with your friends, and subscribe to my channel for more unbelievable true story moments. James settled into his seat. On flight 462, the cabin lights dimmed to a gentle amber glow as passengers settled in for the long journey ahead. At 72, he had flown countless times in his life, yet each flight still brought a small ripple of excitement, a chance to watch the world shrink beneath him as the plane carved its way through the clouds. The cabin smelled faintly of coffee and recycled air, and the low hum of the engines was almost meditative. He adjusted his glasses, feeling the slight ache in his knees, a reminder of the years he had weathered. James had spent most of his life in Atlanta, a city rich with history and hard lessons. He had been a teacher for decades, a mentor to countless children who sometimes remembered his guidance more than he expected. He was proud, yes, but also cautious. He had learned to measure people's actions, to see past words and into intent. Across the aisle, a group of teenagers chatted loudly, their sneakers tapping against the floor, voices carrying despite the polite hush of other passengers. One boy, Connor, had a presence that seemed to demand attention. At 16, he was tall for his age, with sharp features and a confidence that bordered on arrogance. He had inherited his mother Linda's sharp mind and her unyielding sense of propriety, but the nurturing side was still in gestation, somewhere deep beneath his adolescent impulses. Connor had already been warned multiple times at home about how to behave in public, how to mind his manners, as Linda always said. Yet there was a spark of rebellion in him, a desire to test boundaries, and when he noticed James, an elderly black man, quietly reading a book, something in him flared. Perhaps it was boredom, perhaps it was some unformed bias he had picked up from peers. Whatever it was, he nudged his friends and whispered a few comments that would have gone unnoticed if James were younger or less attentive. James felt the glance, caught the muttered snicker, and his heart sank for a moment, not because he was surprised, but because he had seen it too many times before. The subtle acts of disrespect that carried more weight than the words themselves. Yet he remained calm, lifting his gaze to the small screen above the aisle, letting the plane's motion rock away the unease. Connor, emboldened by the lack of immediate confrontation, leaned over slightly, making a comment loud enough for James to hear. "Hey, old man, what are you even doing here? Shouldn't you be, I dunno, retired or something?" His laughter was shrill, and a few nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably. James closed his book slowly, choosing his words carefully. "I'm exactly where I need to be, young man," he said softly, his voice calm but firm, "and I'd appreciate the same courtesy I give others." Connor's face twisted into a smirk, not with understanding, but with the thrill of provocation. He wasn't used to being contradicted, and certainly not by someone he assumed he could intimidate. He scoffed, leaning further into the aisle, catching the attention of a flight attendant passing by. Linda, sitting a few rows behind Connor, had been trying to keep a low profile during the flight. She had flown many times herself, always ensuring Connor stayed within boundaries. But today, she had been caught up in reading a magazine and sipping her tea. Her attention shifted sharply as she noticed Connor's behavior, his voice raised, his posture aggressive, the subtle way he seemed to target James. She felt a flush of anger rising. That was her son, her responsibility, and she knew instinctively that this was more than just a typical teenage quip. It was a lapse in character that needed immediate correction. Meanwhile, James returned to his book, pretending not to notice the escalating attention, but he could feel the weight of the cabin's awareness. Eyes flicked between the teenager and him, some curious, some disapproving, and the tension in the air was subtle but tangible. He remembered another flight years ago when similar behavior had erupted, but that had ended differently. This time, he hoped for decorum, but he knew that sometimes decorum needed a guide. Connor's teasing escalated slightly. The words, sharper now, more pointed. "Man, you look like you belong in a museum or something," he sneered. "Do you even know what's going on in the world today?" A few passengers shifted in their seats, some casting uncomfortable glances at the scene unfolding. One woman muttered to her companion, shaking her head. The flight attendant returned, giving Connor a warning glance. But without the mother nearby, the boy's rebellion had little immediate deterrent. Then, just as Connor seemed to be readying for another jibe, Linda stood, her posture immediately commanding attention, despite her petite frame. "Connor," she said sharply, her voice low but filled with authority. The single word made him freeze, mid-motion. He knew that tone. He had heard it before, when he had crossed lines at home. There was no arguing, no quick retort, just a sinking realization that he had overstepped. James looked up again, a mixture of relief and curiosity crossing his face. He had seen many parents intervene before, but there was a certain grace in how Linda moved, now controlled, firm, unwavering. Linda leaned slightly toward her son. "What are you doing? Do you think it's acceptable to treat someone like that just because of their age or the color of their skin?" Her voice was quiet, but lethal. "Apologize. Right now. To him, and mean it." Connor's smirk faltered. The cabin seemed to hold its collective breath. For a moment, he wavered between defiance and compliance. A storm of adolescent ego, clashing with the clear authority of his mother. Finally, his shoulders slumped, and he muttered the words, almost inaudible at first. I'm sorry, sir." James looked at him, studying the boy's face. There was a trace of remorse, or at least the start of understanding. "Thank you," he said gently. "That's all anyone can ask for." The rest of the flight settled into a tense calm. Connor slouched back into his seat, a bit humbled, while Linda's gaze softened slightly, satisfied that the lesson had been delivered. James returned to his book, but now with a lighter heart, feeling the weight of injustice slightly lifted, not erased, but acknowledged. Outside, the plane continued to climb into the endless blue, the horizon stretching infinitely, a reminder of how vast the world was, and how sometimes, even at 30,000 feet, lessons could still be learned. The first part of the journey was over, but the interactions on this flight would ripple further than any small acts of courage, authority, and respect had set the stage for what would come next. The plane had leveled off, cruising steadily above a blanket of clouds that glimmered faintly under the late afternoon sun. The hum of the engines was a steady comfort to most passengers, but for James, it was a time to reflect, a rare moment of peace after the brief storm of the earlier confrontation. He leaned back in his seat, feeling the gentle vibration of the cabin floor beneath him, and thought about the strange path that had brought him to this flight. James wasn't just an ordinary man who traveled. He was a repository of stories, a man who had lived through eras that most of the passengers aboard this plane could only read about in history books. He had grown up in a time when the air itself seemed heavy with limitations, when doors were closed before they were even approached. Yet, he had persevered, carving out a life as a teacher and later as a community advocate. Every wrinkle on his face, every streak of gray in his hair, told a story of endurance, of moments faced with injustice and the wisdom to respond with measured dignity. As James' mind wandered through these recollections, Connor slouched in his seat across the aisle, still feeling the aftershock of his mother's intervention. The apology he had muttered felt hollow, almost foreign to him. He had never been held accountable so directly, never had the echo of authority confront him with such precision. The humiliation burned slightly in his chest, but beneath that, there was a stirring of curiosity and unease that made him question his own assumptions. Linda, sitting a few rows behind, observed her son from a careful distance. She knew that lessons didn't stop at a single admonishment. Teens were resilient, stubborn, and easily distracted by the adrenaline of rebellion. But she also understood the rare opportunities that presented themselves in public settings. Her own childhood had been a tapestry of lessons learned through observation and experience, and she wanted Connor to see not only the immediate wrongness of his actions, but also the ripple effects they created. The flight attendant returned with a cart, the soft clatter of metal punctuating the otherwise calm cabin. Connor's gaze drifted toward the trolley, but lingered on James, who was now flipping through his book, seemingly absorbed in a story about distant lands and forgotten heroes. Something about the way James held himself, calm, unshaken, unassuming, yet dignified, made Connor feel a strange combination of awe and discomfort. Connor thought about his own life, about the world his mother had tried to shield him from, and the lessons he had brushed off as trivial. Privilege, he realized for the first time in some small, abstract way, came with responsibility. It wasn't just a shield. It was a mirror, showing how one's actions affected others, often in ways that were invisible at first glance. Meanwhile, James allowed himself a small smile at the thought that perhaps even brief human encounters could still carry the weight of learning. He had witnessed many acts of small courage over the years: the shy student who finally spoke up, the neighbor who crossed an invisible line only to recognize their error later. Life, he mused, was a series of moments strung together, each one offering a chance to grow or to falter. The plane dipped slightly, signaling a change in altitude, and Connor's thoughts were interrupted by the soft voice of Linda. "Connor, I need you to understand something," she said, leaning toward him, just enough for him to hear without turning. "It's not just about saying sorry. It's about understanding why it was wrong and carrying that understanding forward. Do you get that?" Connor swallowed, fidgeting with the edge of his sleeve. He wanted to respond with defiance, with a joke, with anything that would let him escape the uncomfortable weight of honesty. But something in his mother's eyes, the sharp intelligence, the unwavering calm, made him pause. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think I get it," he admitted, almost reluctantly. From his seat, James noticed the subtle change in the boy's demeanor. There was no outward display of pride or shame yet, just the quiet shift of someone beginning to reflect. James' intuition told him that real growth often started quietly, beneath the surface, in the private corners of the mind. He returned to his book, feeling a small sense of relief. Sometimes, the seeds of understanding took time to blossom. Connor's mind, however, didn't remain idle. He began to replay the incident in flashes. The look of calm on James' face, the firmness in his mother's tone, the subtle judgment of the nearby passengers who had been silently watching. For the first time, he questioned why he had thought it was acceptable to demean someone based on age or skin color. The thought unsettled him, stirred something deep inside that he hadn't named yet. Linda watched him, sensing the internal dialogue, knowing that patience was key. She had never been a mother to force change through shame alone. She believed in guiding, in showing consequences naturally, in helping Connor see the world as it was, not just as he wanted it to be. The plane was their classroom now, and the lesson was unfolding with quiet intensity. James, feeling the subtle shifts in the cabin's energy, reflected on the larger patterns of human behavior. He thought about the young men he had taught, the mistakes they had made, the growth that had followed. Life's injustices often came without warning, but the right interventions, whether through gentle guidance or firm confrontation, could change the course of someone's path. He hoped that Connor would eventually see this as one of those moments. The next hour passed with a measured calm. Connor remained quiet, occasionally stealing glances at James, processing his own discomfort. Linda sat back, observing both her son and the passenger he had confronted. James' presence was understated, dignified, a silent teacher in his own right. As the plane continued its journey across the vast blue expanse, the story of that encounter began to deepen, not in loud confrontations, but in quiet reflection. The cabin hummed with the ordinary rhythm of travel, yet beneath it lay the undercurrent of change, the subtle evolution of understanding that had begun in the wake of an apology. Hours passed, and the plane glided steadily over an endless sea of clouds. The golden sun, dipping slowly toward the horizon. The cabin lights shifted to a warmer, almost sleepy hue, casting gentle shadows over the rows of passengers. James had closed his book now, letting his eyes wander to the small world around him. Air travel, he thought, was a strange kind of microcosm. People from every walk of life, crammed into a moving metal tube, each carrying their own histories, prejudices, hopes, and regrets. Connor, sitting a few seats away, had shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The earlier apology weighed on him more than he had anticipated. Something about James's calm demeanor, the quiet authority in his voice, had stirred something unfamiliar in the boy. It wasn't fear, exactly, but a disquieting mix of guilt and curiosity. He found himself replaying the incident repeatedly in his mind, questioning why he had felt the need to belittle someone so simply because of who they were. Linda, ever watchful, had observed this change from her vantage point. She knew that moments of reflection were rare in teenagers. Most of the time, the impact of their actions was immediate. But the deeper understanding required time, patience, and subtle guidance. She didn't want to lecture Connor again, would feel punitive, but she also recognized the need to channel his growing awareness before it faded into fleeting guilt. The hum of the engines became a soft soundtrack to the tense, quiet dynamic in that section of the plane. Connor's mind wandered, exploring the gaps in his understanding. He thought about James' life, imagining the decades of experiences, the battles fought silently and loudly, and the resilience required to carry oneself with dignity in a world that could be cruel and unfair. Connor couldn't grasp all of it, not fully, but he sensed its weight and felt, in some embryonic way, the injustice he had inflicted. James, meanwhile, had been scanning the cabin more casually than anyone noticed. He observed the young passengers immersed in their phones, the flight attendants moving with practiced efficiency, the elderly couples holding hands quietly. Yet his gaze returned to Connor periodically, sensing the subtle turbulence in the boy's emotions. James had spent a lifetime reading people, decades in classrooms, had honed a quiet intuition. He could tell when someone was grappling with conscience, even when they didn't fully understand the source. Connor shifted again, pulling at the sleeve of his jacket. He remembered the sting of his mother's words, the sharp edge of authority that had left no room for defiance. "It's not just about saying sorry," she had told him. "It's about understanding why it was wrong." The words repeated in his mind, echoing against the walls of his conscience. He didn't yet know the depth of that understanding, but he felt the first faint tremors of change, the beginnings of reflection that would take root in the days to come. James, sensing the subtle transformation, decided to offer a gentle nudge, not through words, but through presence. He adjusted his posture slightly, leaning back, letting his calm radiate into the space around him. Connor noticed it, a quiet, almost imperceptible shift in the air. There was a dignity there, not born of arrogance but of experience, and it had a strange magnetic pull on the boy. Time seemed to stretch as the plane crossed over the horizon. The sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow on the clouds, illuminating the small cabin in hues of orange and pink. It was a breathtaking view, and for a moment, Connor's eyes softened, catching a glimpse of something larger than himself. He thought of James' life of battles, fought against invisible barriers, of wisdom earned through struggle, and of patience extended even to those who erred. The plane's turbulence increased slightly, a gentle rocking that made passengers clutch armrests or close their eyes. But in that minor chaos, a strange clarity settled over Connor. He realized that the apology had been only the first step. Real change, reflection, and humility. He looked at James once more, noticing the small wrinkles near his eyes, the gentle curve of his lips as he read. It was almost like reading a story, one written over decades, each line carved by experience and resilience. Linda leaned over, her voice a soft murmur that only Connor could hear. "Do you understand now?" she asked, not demanding, but inviting. Connor nodded slowly. "I think I'm starting to," he said, almost hesitantly. I didn't realize how it must feel for him. His words were simple, but beneath them was a recognition of empathy, the first real stirrings of conscience. James glanced at them briefly, a small, knowing smile tugging at his lips. He didn't need to speak. The moment itself was enough. He had seen countless young people falter and grow, and he understood the subtleties of human learning. Sometimes it wasn't about confrontation or punishment. It was about presence, observation, and the quiet passage of time that allowed understanding to seep in. The next hour passed with an almost meditative calm. Connor remained quiet, reflecting on his behavior and the lessons he had received. Linda allowed him this space, recognizing that the internalization of morality couldn't be forced. James returned to his book, but every so often, he allowed his gaze to drift toward Connor, acknowledging the subtle growth unfolding before him. The sun finally disappeared beneath the horizon, leaving a deep blue sky streaked with fading light. The cabin lights dimmed further, passengers beginning to settle into the rhythm of the evening. Conversations were hushed, the occasional chuckle or cough punctuating the quiet. But in that small corner of the plane, something had shifted irrevocably. Connor's understanding of respect, humility, and empathy had begun its first tentative steps. Guided by both the firm hand of his mother and the quiet strength of a man who had lived a full and challenging life. It was a small moment in the vastness of the sky, yet its impact was profound. The interactions of a single flight, a brief confrontation, and a quiet reflection had sown the seeds of change. James' presence, Connor's reflection, and Linda's guidance formed a subtle triad that would ripple far beyond the confines of that airplane cabin. Night had fully settled outside, and the cabin lights glowed with a soft amber, casting gentle warmth across the passengers. The world below was hidden beneath an endless blanket of darkness, twinkling only in distant city lights far below. James leaned back, feeling the familiar rhythm of the plane beneath him. This flight, he reflected, had become more than just a passage from one city to another, had been a small crucible of human behavior, a stage on which lessons of respect, empathy, and growth played out in quiet but profound ways. Connor, still a few seats away, had shifted again, his earlier unease replaced by contemplative calm. He watched James trying to imagine the life the man had lived, the decades of challenges, victories, and quiet perseverance. It struck Connor that the dignity James carried wasn't just a result of age, but of wisdom earned through experience. He began to feel the weight of his own immaturity, recognizing how his words and actions could ripple outward, causing discomfort or pain that he had once dismissed as inconsequential. Linda, ever attentive, observed Connor's transformation. She knew that adolescence was a delicate terrain mixture of ego, rebellion, and nascent morality. But she also understood that moments like these were rare, where the immediacy of consequence aligned perfectly with a young person's capacity for reflection. She didn't intervene this time, simply allowing Connor the space to process, to internalize, and to grow. James closed his book and allowed his gaze to wander across the cabin, settling momentarily on Connor. It's never too late to change, he thought quietly, as much for himself as for the boy. Life had taught him patience, and he knew that real understanding could not be forced. It had to arise naturally from within. The small gestures, the subtle acknowledgments, and the quiet moments of reflection often carried more weight than any lecture. Connor shifted in his seat, feeling the stirrings of something new, empathy. It was unfamiliar and uncomfortable, yet undeniably real. He thought back to the words his mother had spoken, to the calm authority in James' voice, and to the subtle strength he had observed. For the first time, he understood that respect wasn't just about following rules, was about recognizing the humanity in others, and treating them with the care he hoped to receive himself. The plane experienced a light turbulence, causing a ripple of motion through the cabin. Passengers gripped armrests and exchanged nervous glances. But for Connor, the moment mirrored the internal turbulence he had been experiencing for hours. The bumps and shifts of the plane reminded him that life itself was filled with unexpected moments that tested character, patience, and empathy. James noticed Connor's gaze, and gave a slight nod, a gesture of quiet acknowledgement. Connor returned the nod, not as a sign of defiance, but as a silent agreement, a recognition of the lesson he had learned. He felt a sense of humility, a newfound awareness that his actions could have consequences far beyond his own understanding. Linda leaned over again, speaking softly. "Connor, I'm proud of you for taking this seriously," she said. "It's not easy to confront your mistakes, but you did it. Remember this feeling, and let it guide your future choices." Connor nodded, swallowing the lump of emotion that had formed in his throat. He realized that this moment, this small, contained encounter on a plane, was a turning point. It wasn't about punishment, or anger, or embarrassment. It was about growth, about understanding, and about recognizing that every person's dignity mattered. James returned to his book once more, feeling a quiet satisfaction, not from vindication, but from witnessing the ripple effects of patience, dignity, and firm guidance. He thought of the countless students he had taught, the lives he had influenced, and now, this moment on a plane had added another chapter to that ongoing legacy. Connor, still processing, finally spoke quietly. "Sir, I just wanted to say, I really am sorry. I understand now. I'll do better." James looked up, a gentle smile forming. "Thank you, young man. That means more than you know. Keep that understanding with you. We'll guide you well." The rest of the flight passed without incident. The earlier tension had completely dissipated, replaced by a quiet understanding that seemed to linger like a soft hum throughout the cabin. Connor remained introspective, James absorbed in the subtle rhythm of the plane, and Linda quietly content, knowing that her guidance had helped shape a moment of true growth. As the plane began its descent, lights twinkling from the sprawling city below, James reflected on the journey. Life often presented small crucibles, he thought, and the measure of a person was not just how they reacted in moments of comfort, but in moments of challenge and confrontation. Today, he had witnessed one such crucible unfolded. Teen confronted with his own behavior, a mother guiding with firm wisdom, and a man whose presence had quietly inspired reflection. Connor, too, looked out the window at the city lights below, a small private smile on his face. He didn't yet understand everything about life, or about the deep injustices that existed, but he knew this. Respect, empathy, and humility were not abstract concepts. They were living principles, felt in the moments when you faced your own errors and chose to grow. James adjusted his glasses, feeling the subtle ache in his joints, and closed his eyes for a moment. The plane rocked gently as it approached the runway, carrying with it the lessons of the day. Across the aisle, Connor sat a little straighter, aware of the weight of his actions, and ready if only a little to navigate the world with greater understanding. The plane touched down smoothly, and the passengers began to gather their belongings. Connor looked at his mother, who offered a proud, quiet smile. He nodded, a wordless acknowledgement that the lesson had been absorbed. James stood slowly, steadying himself, and walked toward the aisle, carrying with him a quiet sense of accomplishment, not from confrontation, but from witnessing the small, meaningful ways in which humanity could grow.